Hello, I'm Eric Snodgrass. Thank you for watching this Ag Forecast, brought to you by Agrible, the makers of Morning Farm Report. Our software gives growers the insights to make the best decisions possible about their operations. Well, as we start off here by looking at a map of current Northern Hemisphere snowfall, I want to apologize for the sound of my voice. Throughout the week, I've managed to talk just so much about the weather that I've lost it. So if it sounds a little off, I apologize for that. But let's begin here with this map, which shows us in white where we currently have snow cover in the Northern Hemisphere. And I want to do this because it's very important at this point in the season to take a look at where we've established really cold air. So it's not to say that this map is anomalous. In other words, we've got quite a bit of snow cover here, as you can see in Siberia, and also getting into the Mongolian Plateau and some parts of northern China. But if you look across Canada, we can clearly see, almost nearly entirely covering the entire country with snow cover at this point. And so why I'm looking at this is because I don't see any major regions across our coldest parts of the planet right now where we don't have snow cover. And the translation there, that means that we are basically loading up our northern latitudes, really loading up Canada with some pretty substantially cold air. And it's that cold air that can occasionally be kind of unleashed across the United States. And we have to be on the lookout for that. So the reason why I'm starting here is that when we look at some of the longer range forecasts beyond about 7 days from now, there is a lot of discrepancy between the models. In other words, they're not in great agreement. And that presents a challenge to us as meteorologists as we try to decipher which model is performing better and also decide what supplementary information we want to apply to it. So I want to make sure that I'm very upfront that the longer range forecast beyond Thanksgiving is quite challenging at this point. So let's take a look at what the overall flow of the jet stream is doing according to the GFS model. And this is the model that I most often show you, but we're going to compare this today to what's going on with the operational ECMWF or European model. So we go back and take a look at what the flow of the atmosphere is going to do. This is how things start off on Thursday morning, the 16th. What we see here is there's a broader ridge over the Bering Sea, a deep trough kind of coming off the west coast of the United States. The significance of this has been a lot of strong onshore flow right here off of the west coast, incredibly windy along the coastal regions, quite a bit of precipitation. But with the trough here and a trough over the Great Lakes, we've seen a bit of a ridging event happening in the central states, and that's going to basically allow temperatures to kind of rebound. As we step our way forward, what we see is as we get through the day on Thursday and into Friday, that pattern tends to stay in place. But what I want you to look at when you watch this animation is that the GFS is wanting to really not only place but keep in place a deeper trough feature over the central part of Canada and then migrate that over toward the Hudson Bay. And so if this model, does have the better solution of the two models we're going to look at, this is very important for your, the end of November and the beginning of December forecast. And this is what I mean. First thing that we're going to be seeing here is that this weekend, by the time we get into Saturday, a trough is going to be moving through the north central plains. And by the time we get into Saturday, Sunday timeframe, that's going to kick off a developing low pressure center. And we talked about this in our video that came out on Monday morning. And that little low pressure system is actually not that little. It's going to intensify pretty quickly, and that's going to allow some big cold air to kind of seep farther to the south with time. So here's Saturday, getting into Sunday, you can see that trough really plunging. Now, at this point, the models are in relatively close agreement. It's once we get into next week that things start to change quite a bit. Watch what the GFS does. First, develops that trough very deeply over the northeast. This is a lot of cold air that's going to be in the eastern half of the country. But then what it does is by Monday, getting into a Tuesday, broader ridge begins to form here. But notice this. This deeper trough by the time we get into Tuesday timeframe and into basically Wednesday and Thursday is actually so deep that my color bar is kind of off the charts here. So this is suggesting that there's some incredibly cold air that's going to be kind of plunging toward the eastern part of Canada and the northeast. And with that, by the time we get into Thanksgiving, that could be a pretty significant cold shot of air that's coming through the eastern 2/3 of the country, while the far western part of the U.S. will be warm. And here's where the discrepancy really sets up, because at this point, this is what the GFS model says, the operational GFS from Wednesday, which is the models that I'm using to make this video, and this is what the European model says. Now, trough still exists over this part of Canada, but look at the broad ridge over the eastern part, I'm sorry, excuse me, the western and central part of the United States. This is an entirely different look of the overall flow of the jet stream. And there's a lot of reasons for this, but to just keep the video concise, the thing that we need to understand is that both models are picking up on a little bit different signals, which is basically why they're in such large discrepancy at this point. And the difference is this is a warm central plains versus a bitterly cold one if I was looking at the GFS model. Now, if we go back to the GFS, this is what the GFS does in terms of temperatures. So you see the difference? Here we are looking at not this coming Saturday, but the next one on the 25th. And because the GFS reinforces that big trough, it brings us another massive shot of cold air. Now, granted, this is 10 days out, so there's a lot of differences there. But we go back to the beginning here. After that pesky system, which brought rain to parts of the eastern Corn Belt on Wednesday and Thursday, finally moves on off to the north and east. We do get a little bit of cooler air behind it. But then what we see is ahead of our next system, some warm air really surging from the south as that low pressure system takes shape here over the and near the Great Lakes. Now, the models are in agreement about this. You can see that after that system moves on off to the north and east, we do bring in some colder air. So there's another reinforcing cold shot for the weekend for the eastern half of the country. But this is where things start to diverge a little bit. Both models do bring in some warmth into the center plains to start off next week. But what is a big difference is this. That big shot of cold air there that we are basically introducing by Thanksgiving is here in the GFS and is over here in the ECMWF. There's two entirely different solutions to this when we get to Thanksgiving. What both models do agree on is that for Thanksgiving, there are no predictions at this point. So again, I'm making this video late on Wednesday evening. There are no predictions at this point for Thanksgiving to have any massive low pressure systems moving across the United States. And as a consequence, that's very good for travel around Thanksgiving. But I just want to let you know there's so much volatility right now. That could change very quickly, which is why we do these videos as frequently as we do so we can keep up to date on that. So again, here is the temperature anomalies that are showing up on Thanksgiving from the European model. You can see some similarities. We're definitely seeing a colder eastern half of the country. But again, the building of that ridge after this is substantially different from the trough that's digging in here from the GFS model. So long story short, we are watching this incredibly closely, trying to see which solution is best capturing what's going on in the atmosphere, because our two best performing models are in a disagreement about the time period beyond about 7 to 8 days. Okay, in terms of precipitation, what you're watching here is the next 10 days by the GFS model. If I take you back here, basically this is the system that's finally leaving that brought the rain to Illinois, Indiana, Ohio, parts of the Great Lakes states here on Wednesday into Thursday. So it's finally exiting on up to the north and east. And then we get a couple of days. So here's Friday. Where things are relatively calm. But on Friday, again, we're watching that next trough come through, kicking off the development of this low right here. So it looks like as though precipitation moves across the country. Again, we talked about this a couple days ago. By the time we get into the start of our weekend, quite a bit of rainfall that's expected to go in the eastern Corn Belt yet again. So eastern Corn Belt's been quite wet over the last several weeks. That low pressure system deeply intensifies, and this is the big shot of cold air behind this front that we've been discussing. So that's our cooler weather showing up at the end of the weekend and the start of next week. Now, as we move into next week, things start off relatively quiet on Monday, except for the West Coast, where that strong onshore flow is still bringing precipitation. And the GFS that I was using when making this video, by the time we get into Thanksgiving, was kind of picking up on some areas down here in the south of some showers and precipitation. But if you kind of come back here and you see this going up here early in the morning on Thursday, there is a lot of model discrepancy over this right now. So there's a pretty good chance we may not see this precipitation by the time we get out a week from after I'm making this video. So a lot of uncertainty in this. So I want to point that out. I need you to see that there's a lot of discrepancy right now in our model's ability to pick up on this pattern moving forward. But I don't see right now any massive low pressure systems moving across the country, which could cause some major problems. So let's stretch it out. I want to look at the longer range European model. It's 51 member ensemble forecast for temperature anomalies. What's interesting is that the longer range European model, when we look over the next month, so this gets us out to December 15th, does pick up on how that cold air is loaded up in Canada and allows it, basically due to the persistence of a broader trough feature over the Hudson Bay allows for more cold air to kind of occasionally push through the eastern half of the country. The model is very clear about a warmer bias in the southwest, and that'll happen if you have a trough off the west coast and a trough out east. The center and western part of the country will be near average or warmer than average. So I do agree with the longer range forecast in terms of temperatures here by the European model. And also with that strong onshore flow, look how wet it is out west, but basically due to the upper levels of the atmosphere having some pretty strong northwest flow, that tends to keep this whole section of the country relatively dry. We know that the eastern Corn Belt will be dealing with some precipitation this weekend, but the overall pattern is for this to remain relatively dry through the next 30 days or so. And that's what I want to discuss as we finish up this video. You see, I'm starting to just pay close attention to the way that the weather patterns are setting up regions of drier weather and wetter weather as we move into winter. Because for our next planting season, we really want to be careful in the Corn Belt for seeing drought develop here to the south and west of the Corn Belt. So think Texas over toward Louisiana, up to Missouri, and back over here to parts of Nebraska, maybe get to Colorado. And this little region right in through here has been dry for the last 60 days. And in fact, over the last 30 days, this is what our precipitation anomalies have been. So very wet eastern Corn Belt, but look at the center states. If we continue to see a pattern that gives us a really active Ohio River Valley storm track, that may leave the center states a bit of a dry bias for this winter. We've got to watch that. So that's just something that I'm looking at every single day. I'll kind of keep you posted on what I see here. But I think to finish this up, I want to at least give you another flavor for the longer range forecast getting into our winter. Just yesterday, the long range model forecast that come out from what's called the National Multi-Model Ensemble. All of those models are kind of summarized and put into what's called the IRI Multi-Model Probability Forecast. And so this is the December, January, February precipitation anomaly map issued at the beginning here of November. If we just look at the United States, one thing that we do see is that most of the Corn Belt right now is favored in these separate models, when they're all put together, to have a bit of a wet bias. And we can see the southeastern United States carrying a bit of a dry bias. So this is important to see, because this is now 2 months in a row that the models have picked up on this pattern. And I'll be honest with you, this is very, very much like a La Nina weather pattern. In terms of temperatures, here's the latest global look on temperatures, and what we see from the IRI multi-model group is that we carry a warm bias here in the southwest and a cool bias here across a lot of the Corn Belt. Now, I'll just let you know something. A year ago, when these forecasts were being produced and the La Nina we had a year ago was going, things looked very similar to this as well. And while December did come in cold, the rest of winter really moderated substantially. Why I am tending to lead toward agreeing with this is going back to the first slide I showed you, where we are establishing some pretty chilly air right now due to some snow cover and the persistent troughing in Canada. And if that cold air sets up there to start off our winter, then it can certainly be used multiple times to bring in colder patterns here into the central states. So I just want to give you some longer term perspective. We add this at Agrible to our long range analog models, along with other statistical models, to really get a picture overall of the flow of the atmosphere through our winter. And there is some agreement right now between what you're seeing here and what our modeling systems are showing. And so with that, I think I'll wrap up this forecast video. We hope you look forward to our next forecast coming out on Monday. To get morning farm report for your operations, click the daily email that shows you a snapshot of your field conditions each morning. Go to morningfarmreport.com. Sign up for a free account. Full grower accounts are free if you sign up for our sustainable yield program or for growers who work with ADM merchandisers. So I look forward to talking to you again on Monday. Hopefully by then I have a full voice again, and I'll sound a little more enthusiastic as we dig through the weather. Thank you for taking some time to watch this, and I look forward to talking to you again on Monday.